As a pretty young and introverted girl, I'd turned to dating apps to expand my social circle and maybe find something real and lasting. I always found it tough to put myself out there, especially face-to-face with strangers, so tools like Tinder let me ease into conversations before risking an in-person meetup. Just for context, I'm a woman in my early 20s, and I'd been swiping on Tinder for a bit over a year by then. Most chats had gone smoothly, either leading to a few months of dating or just friendly vibes. Any splits were always mutual, no bitterness lingering. This nightmare kicked off a couple months after my last breakup. I'd been messaging this guy, let's call him Peter, for about 2 weeks on Tinder. From our texts, he came across as sweet and a little reserved, which honestly appealed to me since I'm shy too. Finally, he mustered up the courage to ask me out, and we linked up at a nearby restaurant that same week. When I first saw him in the flesh, everything felt normal at the start. My worst nightmare is catfishing with photos that don't match reality, but Peter looked exactly like his pics, and his voice was just as quiet and gentle as in our messages. Dinner conversation turned painfully awkward, though. He barely uttered a word, his eyes darting everywhere. I'm not a chatterbox myself, so I pushed hard to draw him out, but he'd just mumble one-word replies. At one spot, he even excused himself to grab something from his car and vanished for nearly 15 minutes, stranding me there alone. Naturally, as the meal wrapped up, I gently broke it to him that I wasn't feeling the spark and didn't see us going further romantically. He just stood there in silence, nodded once, and shuffled off to his car. I felt a pang of guilt, but that's life. I climbed into my own ride and drove home. That evening, Peter crossed my mind a few times, leaving me with this odd emptiness from the sudden silence in my texts, but I plopped down and flicked on a movie to shake it off. It was pushing 11 p.m. when faint footsteps crept up to my front door and halted. I hit mute on the TV and twisted toward the entrance, frozen on the couch. Exhaustion weighed on me, but I knew I'd heard it. Those agonizing 30 seconds ticked by before thunderous knocks exploded against the door. It jolted me to my core. Even though part of me had braced for something that I rose and peered through the peephole, my heart dropping. It was Peter standing there. I cracked the door just enough to poke my head out. What the hell are you doing here, Peter?" He stared at me, then glanced away, scanning the shadows. That sent chills racing down my spine, so I slammed the door shut and bolted it, praying he'd take the cue and vanish from my property. Moments later, footsteps retreated toward the driveway, followed by a car engine roaring to life and fading away. I double-checked through the window to confirm he was gone, then collapsed back onto the couch. In the haze of shock and fatigue, it didn't hit me right away, but as I settled in, the realization crashed over me. I'd never shared my address with Peter. A wave of dread surged through my veins, and I rushed to the window again for reassurance. I didn't feel outright threatened yet, just deeply unsettled, wondering if he was unhinged and had latched onto me too intensely. I headed to bed soon after and somehow slept soundly through the night. Come morning, I brewed coffee and whipped up breakfast, hunkering down indoors against the biting cold and snow. It wasn't until I dragged the trash out to the curb that I spotted eerie footprints circling the side of the house. Tracing them, they looped around both flanks, right up to the backyard gate, then veered off to the road. I replayed last night's sounds in my head, certain Peter had only approached the door, not prowled the perimeter. These tracks must have been etched in the dead of night while I slumbered. Back in the living room, a suffocating unease gripped me, nerves fraying at the edges. It might sound ridiculous, but my social anxiety screamed for excuses to avoid dialing 911. Thank God, though, raw panic overpowered it, forcing my hand to call the cops. That choice probably saved my life. Phone still clutched after spilling everything to the dispatcher, I fixed my gaze on the floor, drawing shaky breaths to steady my spinning mind. I'd never faced anything like this, so the stress hit like a freight train. But as I stood there battling for calm, crunching footsteps echoed in the snow just outside the living room window. Terror doesn't even cover it. I was utterly petrified. The steps paused right by the pane, and I inched backward, heart pounding, aiming for the kitchen. Then, a chilling scrape pierced the air, probably a blade jamming into the window frame. prying it loose. In my blind horror, I let out a blood-curdling scream. Instantly, the footsteps bolted around the house's side, followed by the brutal crash of the gate splintering open. I snatched the nearest kitchen knife and bolted upstairs. Rounding the corner, though, I caught a horrifying flash of Peter at the glass back door, wrenching it viciously that I barricaded myself in the bathroom, sobs racking me as I gripped the knife, ears assaulted by the savage pounding, scratching, and slamming downstairs. It roared like a feral beast clawing to burst in. Those 2 or 3 minutes stretched into eternity. My mind raced with nightmarish visions of what he'd unleash if he broke through, tearing me apart emotionally, but then, a firm knock at the front door drowned out the chaos at the back, which ceased abruptly. An officer's voice rang out, and I dashed to let them in. Peter had fled, but they tracked him down fast, and he confessed to it all, offering scant excuses for his madness. He just came off as deranged and volatile. It's bone-chilling how this erupted from what seemed like a harmless, amiable guy. The ordeal shattered my ability to trust, and I swore off dating apps for good. One of the most horrifying parts. The back door was mangled beyond repair, clinging by a thread on its latch. If the police had arrived even minutes later, Peter would have breached it, and God knows what atrocities he'd have inflicted once he reached me. Everyone has those ex-boyfriend or girlfriend horror stories, but mine? It was with someone who was just a friend. I'll call him Brian to protect his privacy, and mine. We crossed paths during my junior year of high school, introduced by a mutual friend, and things clicked almost instantly. We didn't attend the same school, he lived about half an hour away, but we'd link up every single weekend, grabbing bites, cruising aimlessly, spilling our guts. We'd hit up concerts and wild parties together too. For what felt like forever, we were each other's ride-or-die best friend. But there was always this odd vibe about him. He'd bombard me with texts, 6, 7 in a frenzy if I didn't reply right away. I shrugged it off, figuring life was throwing curveballs his way. Then one chilling night, chatting with our mutual friend Holly, the one who'd brought us together, she dropped a bomb. She suspected Brian was fabricating some heavy, dark lies. He'd claimed to both of us early on that his sister was battling cancer. But when he spun the tale to Holly during a hangout, the details didn't match up at all. We dug into his mom's Facebook, she shared every little thing, and there wasn't a whisper of anything that massive. Red flags everywhere. I'd never laid eyes on his sister since we never chilled at his place, but I hadn't questioned it. I hated having people over at my house too. As Holly and I swapped stories, the deceptions piled up like a house of cards teetering on the edge. He'd whispered to me that he might have cancer himself. He talked about being rushed to the hospital for dire emergencies, only to bounce back miraculously hours later. Piecing it all together, we were stunned at the web of lies he'd woven. My heart shattered. How could my supposed best friend deceive me on something so raw and painful? We vowed to face him head-on and then pull away for good. Holly fired off the first text, and that's when the storm erupted. He swore he'd just suffered a seizure, which I flat out didn't buy anymore. He began ringing my phone relentlessly while I was at work. It was suffocating. Holly confided he'd unleashed hell on her too, so she slammed the block button. I hated the idea of vanishing without a word, but his actions were straight up unnerving. I shot him a text. I couldn't stay friends with a liar, especially one who toyed with such delicate, gut-wrenching topics. From there, I silenced his calls and messages but held off on blocking him entirely. A couple of days ticked by, then my dad rang me, his voice laced with alarm. Brian had somehow dialed him up, probing about me, even spinning a yarn that something grave had befallen me. My blood ran cold. How on earth did he snag my dad's number? Then my brother hit me with it. Brian had slid into his Instagram DMs, threatening to harm himself if I didn't respond. He pulled the same stunt on one of my closest friends. The absolute nightmare? He vowed to take his own life in the exact same harrowing way my oldest brother had, and he knew every twisted detail about that tragedy. That crushed me, the final snap. I poured out my rage and heard in one last blistering message, then blocked him cold. Silence descended for a stretch. But months later, dread hit like a thunderclap when he strode right through the doors of my job. I spotted him instantly, heart pounding, and ducked into the back, begging my manager to claim I'd quit ages ago. And sure enough, he demanded to know if I was there. For the next week, a coworker shadowed me out every shift, eyes scanning the shadows in case he lurked outside. It wasn't long before the terror escalated. Pulling up to my house one night, I froze at the sight of his car idling on the street. The place was empty, no one home, so I peeled out and raced to a friend's, pulse racing. Deep down, I didn't believe he'd physically harm me, but the real horror? I had no clue who he truly was anymore, and that uncertainty chilled me to the bone. In the aftermath, I reached out to his mom, laying bare every twisted detail. I begged her to stop him from stalking my work or home, but I couldn't bring myself to drag the cops in. I still cared for his family, which twisted the knife even deeper. Even now, he crafts phony accounts to slither back into my life, maybe twice a year. I know he's unraveling mentally, and I genuinely pray he finds peace and healing. But I'm sharing this nightmare because toxicity isn't reserved for exes, friends can poison your world too. When someone bears their true, monstrous self, don't rationalize it away. Guard your sanity fiercely, and above all, stay safe. I ended things with my ex a few years back. He'd turned into this reckless mess, couldn't keep a job or handle any real responsibilities, so it all just fell apart. Even with all his flaws, though, I never imagined he'd stoop to something this twisted. Those first few months after the split were blissfully calm and serene. I was savoring my freedom, just drifting through the days without a care. But one night, as I drove home from work way later than usual, my heart skipped when I pulled into the driveway and spotted a figure clad in all black lurking outside the left side window of my house, peering in like some shadowy predator. It sent chills down my spine, so I reversed out fast, parked down the street, and dialed the cops with trembling fingers. I huddled there waiting, pulse racing, until they arrived and told me the intruder had vanished. They pressed me on who it might be, but I shook my head, no clue. My ex? Nah, he wasn't that unhinged, and no one else came to mind. The following week dragged on uneventfully, but I double-checked every window lock before bed, nerves on edge. Then one morning, a rustling outside my bedroom window jolted me awake, like something prowling in the bushes, maybe an animal, but my mind flashed straight to that creepy silhouette from before. I bolted upright, threw on clothes in a panic, knowing the blinds shielded me from prying eyes. Still, dread gnawed at me. I couldn't risk calling the police over a damn squirrel. So I yanked the blinds open, breath held. Empty. I pressed my face closer, scanning down the house's side, nothing. Relief washed over me in a heavy sigh, easing the knot in my chest, and I carried on with my routine before rushing off to work. Arriving home late again, I was utterly drained, bone-tired. I whipped up a quick dinner, zoned out to some TV, then crawled toward bed early, craving escape. But as I shuffled down the hallway to my room, a glimpse from the corner of my eye froze me solid. The window cracked open at the bottom, just a sliver, but I swore I'd locked it tight. Someone had forced it. I crept closer, inspecting with wide eyes, then slammed it shut. The lock latch? Ripped clean off, vanished. Terror gripped me like icy claws. This wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It felt invaded, hostile. I knew I had to call the cops, but fear silenced me, whispering that making a sound might summon whoever lurked inside. I stood paralyzed in the hush, minutes blurring, until my phone's sharp beep shattered the quiet, making me flinch like a gunshot. Fumbling it out, my gut plummeted. It was a text from my ex. "How are you doing?" Shock rooted me, pieces clicking in horror. Coincidence? Or something far darker? Was he out there, eyes on me even now. Panic surged, flooding my veins. I whipped around wildly, backing into a corner to guard my blind spots. Then another ping, "We need to talk." Tears burned as I stifled sobs, silenced the phone, and inched toward the front door, every step a thunder in my ears. I gripped the knob, easing it open with a betraying creak that echoed too loud. Instantly, a heavy thump erupted from my bedroom door behind me. I hurled the front door wide and bolted into the night, sprinting down the road in blind flight. I ducked behind a neighbor's house, gasping, and called the police, voice breaking. They sped in fast, and I edged to my driveway as they stormed inside. Moments later, they emerged, hauling my ex out, wrists cuffed, shoving him into the squad car. He was begging, voice cracking. He just wanted to talk, knew it was wrong, swore he wouldn't hurt me. But tucked in his pocket? A knife, gleaming and deadly. God, I hope that's the end of him in my life. Sure, he clung to that "just talk" lie, so I'll never truly know his intentions. But hiding in my bedroom with a blade. I know I dodged something nightmarish, escaping with my life intact.
If you find my story interesting, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss even more captivating stories.